Someone broke into my house and tried to find me. A few years ago, I was renting a house in Northern California. The neighborhood was just outside the suburbs. It seemed like the perfect balance of having space and having nice neighbors close enough to not feel isolated. The area had no streetlights, so it was very dark at night, especially if there were clouds blocking the moonlight. It didn't bother me though. It made my little house feel even more quaint on dark nights. I got home from work one day in midwinter. It was a cloudy night, so pulling up to my house, I saw only what my headlights and the front porch light illuminated. When I got out of my car, I caught a whiff of cigarette smoke. That was odd, as I never smelled that before around the house. I didn't see anybody nearby, so I ignored it and went inside. I had just got off the shift with a few hours of overtime, so I felt pretty tired. Even though it wasn't even 7 yet, I decided to take a shower and call it a night. I woke up sometime later sure that I heard a noise inside my house. I wasn't worried right away, because my friend would sometimes stop by to use my shower after work on his way to his night classes. I even gave him a spare key so he could stop by when I wasn't home. He would always text me to let me know beforehand though, and I hadn't heard my phone go off. I reached over my bedside table and picked up my cell phone to see if my friend had sent me a text. The bright light from my phone's screen and number pad blinded me. These were the days before phones had light sensors that would dim the screen in the dark. And this particular phone was so bright that I could use it as a flashlight. Through my squinted eyes, I could make out that it was 9-something, but I couldn't tell if I had an unread text or not. I set my phone aside and called out my friend's name. There were a couple seconds of silence before I heard loud footsteps as someone started running through the bottom floor of my house. I leapt out of bed and ran to the closet. They were already up at the stairs by the time I had opened the door and stepped inside. That house had 3 rooms upstairs, 2 bedrooms on either side of the hallway, the one I was in and a spare, and the bathroom at the end. The bedroom doors were both closed, but the bathroom door was cracked open. I heard whoever was in my house thunder down the hallway and past my door into the bathroom. Thank God he did. That gave me enough time to open the attic access in the ceiling of my attic closet and hoist myself up. I had just started to lift myself up when the person ran out of the bathroom. My feet were barely inside of the attic when my bedroom door burst open. I heard footsteps run into my room and stop. When they didn't see me in that room, they ran back into the hallway and into the other room, which just had boxes stacked in the corner, some weights, and the table where I painted my miniature models. I guess they decided that if someone was hiding, it would be in the bedroom, because they charged back into my room and turned on the light. A moment later, the closet door was ripped open. I was crouched in my attic just a foot or so away from the access, so I could try to stop them if they started to climb up. From my vantage point, all I could see was from their knee down. They were wearing dirty blue jeans with frayed cuffs and worn work boots. After a few seconds of looking in the closet, they stepped away and I heard a loud crash come from my room, followed by a scream of frustration and anger. The scream was the most unnerving part of the incident for me. It reminded me far too much of my stepfather, who would scream in a similar way when he lost his temper. He would eventually be put in a mental hospital for several mental disorders that resulted in erratic and violent tendencies. The man ran back down the stairs. I heard crashes and clatters as things were thrown and furniture was knocked over. I stayed crouched in the attic. I had left my cell phone when I had ran for the closet, and I wasn't certain I could climb down without him hearing. After some time, the noises stopped. I started counting slowly. When I reached 1,000, I decided I was safe enough and climbed down to call the police. The first thing I noticed when I exited the closet was the intruder had flipped my bed over. That was the loud noise I had heard when he stepped away from the closet. I couldn't find my cell phone, so I went to the landline by my bed and called the police. I waited in my room until I heard them call out from downstairs. The first floor was a mess, but I had expected that. Chairs had been knocked over, the sofa had been flipped, all the books, pictures, and knickknacks I had on my shelves were strewn across the floor. The cupboards in the kitchen had been opened, and the boxes and canned food had been thrown to the ground. As far as I could tell, the only thing missing was a single knife out of the wooden block in my kitchen. The police checked the house from top to bottom. They found that the side door had been forced open by something like a crowbar. They also found a few cigarette butts along my fence line, along with some foil and an empty pen tube, which the police said people often use to smoke meth, so they think he'd been watching my house for a while. I realized that he must have been out there smoking a cigarette when I got home. They collected up the evidence and told me I should stay with friends or family that night and get that door fixed as soon as possible. I opted to just not sleep. I moved the shelf over to block the broken door and spent the next couple hours cleaning things up. I would often go to the window with a flashlight and shine it along the fence line where the police found the cigarette butts in foil. But I didn't see anything. The next day, I called to have the door fixed and motion lights installed at the back sides of my house. I ran a phone cable up in the attic and added a landline. I never wanted to be stuck up there without a phone again. Nothing else happened at the house though. I lived there another 3 years without incident. One more precaution I took was practicing getting out of my bed, going to my closet and climbing into the attic as quickly and as quietly as possible. I even kept at it when I moved, except now I go to a crawl space in the back of the closet instead of the attic. I try not to think of what would have happened if I had been a bit slower getting to the attic, or if he hadn't gone to the bathroom at the end of the hall first. Independence Day discovery. I live in a small rural community in eastern US. It's a nice little town. Because of my work in the medical field, I've met some interesting folk. I'm also familiar with law enforcement and emergency personnel. Small town life is not as dull and uneventful as people think, especially since everybody knows somebody who knows somebody. I have a lot of stories to share, but since this one just happened, I'll start here. Because it's still very recent and the investigation is ongoing, I have to be vague with some details, but I needed to tell someone. I'm single and live alone. Due to a stalker, I've moved twice, but that's another story for another time. However, it is relevant to this story for multiple reasons. First reason being that I have a dog for the sake of protection, as well as have motion sensors and outdoor security cameras. The second reason being the location of my home, which is literally down the street from the fire department, and a couple blocks from the police station. However, next to the fire department is the road department, which is basically a parking lot where they park their road equipment and empty garbage trucks at night and on the weekends. Oddly, it doesn't have a security camera. Small town life, I suppose. My house sits on a hill with a good view of that side of the street. Due to the incline, the large trees in the front yard, and the half cornfield on the property next to me, most of the people on the street below wouldn't notice me in the backyard unless they were actively looking. However, I can see the street clearly. The incident happened Saturday evening. The county was holding its annual Independence Day spiel with community barbecue, music, fireworks, etc. I did not attend because it's just not my thing. Plus, I have a dog and the sound of fireworks could be traumatizing. I took the dog out to relieve herself in the backyard. There was still at least an hour of daylight, but the entire neighborhood was pretty quiet, because most everyone was at the fairgrounds and various other holiday events. So when an unfamiliar large white pickup truck drove slowly down the street, I noticed. It must have turned around at the end of the street because I saw it again, moving in the opposite direction, only about 20 seconds later. This time, it turned onto the parking lot of the road department. Now, people haven't known to toss things into the empty garbage trucks because they don't want to or aren't able to make the trip to the landfill themselves. Usually, it's things like furniture or broken equipment, but I didn't see any of those things in the back of this truck. The driver was a somewhat stocky guy of average height. He took 3 large black trash bags from the bed of his truck and tossed them one by one into the hopper of the garbage truck. Then he left. Now I swear I'm not one of those meddling rear window types who always thinks activity is suspicious and that their neighbors are up to no good. But something about this didn't sit right with me. Normally, when I see people tossing their garbage into the trucks and leaving, I don't bother reporting it because it's relatively harmless. But this time, I had a gut feeling, so I called the police. If anything, they could get the guy for illegally dumping trash from a barbecue or whatever. While I'm on the phone with dispatch, I put my dog inside to cut down on distractions while the officers investigate. A few minutes later, an officer arrived and I crossed the street to meet him, gave him a description of the events, and pointed out to which of the trucks the man had tossed the bags. He found the bags. He took photos. He put on gloves and told me to stay back. The bags were tied in a knot at the top, and it took him a minute to untie one because of the gloves and how tight the knot was. But he eventually got it open, looked inside for a few seconds, then twisted it closed and took a few steps back. "Shit," he hissed under his breath. "What?" I asked. "It's a body." I felt sick. I could tell he felt sick too. I saw him grow pale. His hand was trembling when he held the radio. Even his voice was shaking as he gave the code to dispatch. The dispatcher sounded confused when she asked him to repeat it. Within 10 minutes, the county sheriff was on the scene. Even he looked sick at the contents of the bag. The coroner arrived around 10 minutes after that, and the first officer walked me back to the house along with another one who arrived at the same time as the coroner. Though I showed the first cop via the app on my phone when I described the events initially, I never showed them the video on a larger screen. The camera caught the footage of the truck as it drove by both times, as well as it pulling into the parking lot, though unfortunately not a clear view of the license plate or the man tossing the bags out of frame. We watched the footage over and over, pausing the frames, the officers taking notes. Ultimately, they requested this footage as well as the copy of the files from the past week to see if the truck had been in the area before. I've also been saving footage until the road department installs their own cameras this week. Because this is still fresh, I don't know any more details. I know the body was in pieces, but I don't know the age of the victim, the gender, cause of death, any of that. Information hasn't been released to the public. I don't know if the coroner has even been able to identify the body yet. A police cruiser has been parked at the fire department next door for constant surveillance, in case the guy comes back. The guy who dumped the body was likely a local. How else would he know he could dump there? He probably thought it would get buried in other people's illegal trash accumulated over the holiday weekend, and the sanitation crew wouldn't have bothered to investigate. When I think about how this guy lives in my community, it makes me feel physically ill. To think that he had clearly scouted the area for a dump site, that it may have not been the first time this happened, and that this could happen again. If I hadn't called it in, if I hadn't been there in the backyard at that exact moment, or if I had ignored that gut feeling, the victim would have never been found, may never find potential justice, and their loved ones may never have closure. In fact, there's a possibility that it might just happen again to another poor soul. I hope it's not me. Dear God, please don't let it be me. Just a nice Christmas Eve drive. This happened over 20 years ago. I was driving back home with my girlfriend at the time. It was Christmas Eve, and my mother's family used to hold a large celebration at my aunt's house in Estacada. This was my girlfriend's first time meeting with my extended family, but she got on quite well with them. We spent the majority of the afternoon and evening talking, playing poker, and drinking an assortment of adult beverages. My girlfriend had been quite inebriated by the time we had to leave. Therefore, I'd be driving us home. It was around 11 p.m. or so. I was driving my girlfriend's car along Highway 211. Now, this stretch of road is surrounded by farms and dense patches of forest, and all parts of it are unlit. But nothing to fear. I grew up in this area, so I knew this road like the back of my hand. The both of us were just driving and talking away, just two young lovers making the most of our moment together. There is a portion of the highway that descends down an enormous hill before crossing Deep Creek. Surrounding both sides of the road are thick forest. There are no lights. The only thing we could see was the area directly in front of our headlights. I drive down the hill, cross the bridge, and uphill through more forest. It's as the highway starts to flatten out that it happens. Something sprints across the road so suddenly that I almost hit whatever it was. I slam on the brakes. I turn to my girlfriend and ask her if she saw it. She confirmed that she had, but she couldn't make out what it was. Maybe it was a coyote, as they're fairly common in this area, but something felt off about it. Whatever it was ran in front of our car and disappeared into the woods next to the road. Coyotes usually don't just dart out in front of cars. Not like that anyway. For some reason, I decided to check it out. I turned the car around and switched on the high beams to better light up the forest in which this thing had vanished in. I step out of the car and walk towards the woods. I don't see anything, but now I feel like perhaps I made a grave error. My heart is pounding, and the hairs on the back of my neck are standing at full attention, but I still don't see anything unusual in the trees. Suddenly the car's horn blasts. It's not a beep, beep, beep that you'd get if, say, your driver or passenger wanted you to hurry and get in the car. It was a long, blaring beep. I walked back into the car and asked my girlfriend why she leaned on the horn like that. She said nothing. Instead, she pointed at a spot about 50 feet from where I was standing. I looked over in that direction, and that's when I saw it. Surely it was that thing that ran in front of our car. It was a man. He was completely naked. His skin was covered in dirt and mud, and in one of his hands, he was holding a hatchet. He looked back at us, and then he smiled and waved to us just before turning around and walking back into the forest. Needless to say, we got the hell out of there. Once we were safely driving again, my girlfriend explained what had just happened. While I was trying to look for the man in the area he initially vanished in, he circled around and came out from another spot in the forest, beyond my car headlights. My girlfriend had seen something out of the corner of her eye, and that's when she saw him. Before she honked the horn, he was walking towards me. His hatchet was raised as if making to strike me. We called the authorities once we got safely back home, but they never found anybody. Or they did and just didn't tell us. But the officer we spoke to explained his theory. That man was obviously trying to ambush unsuspecting lone travelers for Lord knows what reason. We all agreed that my girlfriend's quick thinking saved my life, as it let my potential killer know that I wasn't alone out there. I moved back into the area recently, so now I drive that highway often. No naked hatchet man sightings yet, but I can tell you that I'm definitely extra vigilant now, especially near Deep Creek. Being stalked by my neighbor. Hi everyone. I'm really writing this out as a way to vent because I'm in a situation where I feel really stuck. Any advice is appreciated, but I'm not sure if there's anything that can be said that will actually help. I've tried just about everything. I'm gonna start from the beginning. This is a story 2 years in the making, so I'll try to be as thorough as possible. In 2019, I graduated with my master's degree and moved to a relatively rural area for my PhD. Thinking we'd make an investment, my dad and I purchased a house. The intent was to rent it out once I completed my PhD. This house was only a block away from a dive bar where my dad was able to make pretty good friends. He introduced me to everyone, and everyone let me know that I would be so happy in my new house, because my next door neighbor was the absolute nicest guy you could ever meet. So we met the neighbor, and he did seem nice enough. He suggested we exchange numbers just in case I ever needed anything, and I thought it was a good idea. What's the worst thing that could happen? A few days later, my dad left to go back to his home in another state, and I was left to my own devices. Literally the day he left, it started. My neighbor texted me while I was away and let me know that he left a gift on my front porch. In this text exchange, he started using pet names like Sweetie and Cutie. I went home and he had left a hand-painted feeding dish for my cats in my mailbox. At this point, I wasn't that alarmed. He was just being nice, I thought. The next day, he sent me more texts with pet names and I took the opportunity to make sure he knew I was not interested in anything romantic. He replied back with a rambling text about how all a person ever needs is friends, and he would like to be friends with me. After that, he would send me texts frequently. Everything from inviting me fishing to telling me he left more gifts on my porch. I would often not reply or would tell him I'm busy. I didn't want to be rude, but I also had no interest in any sort of relationship with him other than being neighborly. One night I got a text from the manager of the bar down the street, letting me know that if my neighbor knocked on my door, I shouldn't answer. She told me that my neighbor had walked down to the bar with a hatchet and told the bartender he was hearing voices that got louder as he got closer to the bar. He threatened to kill someone with the hatchet if the voices didn't stop. They called the police, and the police took the hatchet from him but made no arrest. The manager of the bar picked me up and I spent the night at her house. She told me that the police said my neighbor was on meth. After that, I tried to keep my distance even more, but things got even weirder. One day I went out to my car to find a dead squirrel in my driveway. This squirrel had clearly been run over and moved to right in front of my driver's side door. I just stepped over it, got in my car, and left. When I returned home, the squirrel was gone. Shortly after, I received a text from my neighbor that said, "Someone or something put a dead squirrel in your driveway. Don't worry, I moved it for you." I felt like this was a weird way to word this, and I suspected he's the one who put the squirrel in my driveway. Another time, I walked out of my house to see he had placed an unspent shotgun shell on the bricks in his front yard. He came out and told me that it was to serve as a warning for anyone walking between our houses. For the next couple of months, I did my best to avoid him. He would text me inviting me over and I would come up with an excuse or just ignore him completely. I wanted to remain cordial since he was my neighbor, but it was getting very annoying and I was uncomfortable. He would text me as soon as I got home, telling me that he was watching me come and go from my house. Around Halloween, he handcrafted a large casket and wrote, "Here lies the last son of a bitch who played mind games. November 2012. What the fuck? All this time still sending me texts? Eventually I got fed up and I stopped responding completely. Less than 2 weeks after I stopped responding completely, he threw a 50-pound flower pot at my front door. You know those big concrete planters? Yeah, one of those. I called the police, who advised me to get a stalking no contact order. A few days later, I was watching TV when a notification popped up that my neighbor was trying to cast a video on my screen. I declined it. Twice. I filed another report with the police. During this time, I started the process of getting a stalking no contact order. I saw 3 different victim advocates who all told me different things. I went out of town for a conference, and during that time, someone had attempted to break into my home. I had an ADT security system, so while they didn't succeed, I was aware of the attempt. After the conference, I came home to the entire world shutting down because of COVID, and I was trapped in my home 24/7 with a stalker neighbor next door. Luckily, court proceedings for protection orders didn't stop. Right before court, he sent me a text telling me that he was sorry for what he'd done, that he could tell when he saw me outside that he made me uncomfortable. Then he went on to tell me that my hair has gotten longer and I look beautiful. I went to court and provided all the evidence I had, the timeline of everything that had ever happened, the text he had sent me asking if I wanted a massage, the text I sent him telling him the way he was speaking to me was inappropriate, the text saying that he knew he made me uncomfortable. I told the judge that I suspected he had attempted to break into my house while I was out of town. The kicker is, he didn't deny any of it. Actually, he told the judge that he took full accountability for everything. He said that he was in recovery and was trying to turn over a new leaf. He didn't oppose the protection order at all. So in March of 2020, I actually received the stalking no contact order. Everything was pretty quiet for a while. I mean, he did some weird shit, but that wasn't because he was a weird guy. It wasn't anything that made me fear for my safety. That is, until he got on drugs again. At this time, we found the unspent shotgun casing in my flower bed. It was consistent with the one he had previously used to send a warning. This occurred a couple months after I started dating my boyfriend, and I suspect that was a warning to him. After this, for a variety of reasons, my boyfriend moved in with me. He moved in pretty quickly, but everything turned out fine. We still live together and as happy in our relationship as we can be. New Year's of 2021, I was awoken to yelling. I turned on my security cameras and got footage of him sticking his head out the window and screaming obscenities at my bedroom window for about 7 minutes. It doesn't sound like a long time, but when your stalker is screaming threats and obscenities, 7 minutes is a long time. He called me a harlot. He said happy fucking New Year. He said he was going to blow up his house with his gas line. I called the police who responded. They told me that he never said my name, so they can't prove it was a violation of the protection order. The officer said, and I quote, "There's nothing illegal about yelling in your own house." They left without even speaking to him. All I could do at this point was do my best to avoid him. I parked on the street because my driveway was pretty close to his front porch. I got used to living with my curtains drawn. I always made sure that my cameras were charged. All 5 of them. Yes, because of him, I spent over $1,000 on cameras. Every inch of my yard is covered. Since then, he's been seen by me and other neighbors talking to people who aren't there, going outside and screaming nonsense. Things like, "I have Cheerios on my necklace," or "I'll put my penis in your butt." I'm not even joking. In the morning, I was getting ready for the day when I heard screaming. "Someone is gonna die over this sweatshirt." I turned on the cameras. I got footage of him walking around the alley behind my house screaming, "Are you fucking proud? How about I get my shotgun? I'll get everybody all fired up." I called the police. Once again, they didn't charge him with violation of the protection order. Instead, they gave him an ordinance violation for disturbing the peace. Police told me that it seems like he's off his medication again. And that was that. They left. Last night, I was awoken to hammering outside my window at 1 a.m. He was cutting down his privacy fence, horizontally. I called the police for a noise complaint. They just told him to stop. And that was that. As I write this, he is outside continuing to horizontally cut down his privacy fence. That means the privacy fence only stands about 3 feet tall now. This was the only thing that made me feel relatively safe about hanging out in my backyard, and now that's gone. All of this is to say I'm tired. I just want to live in a house where I can be sure that my neighbor won't try to kill me, where I can feel confident he's not going to try to break in. My boyfriend and I are trying to buy a house and move, but it's difficult. I'm a PhD student, so I don't make very much money. Renting won't work because I have 4 cats, and finding a place to rent with so many animals is difficult if not impossible. I refuse to rehome them, so maybe it's partially my fault I'm stuck in this situation. My dad has agreed to co-sign on another mortgage and I've gotten a second job. We should be able to save up enough money within a few months, but until then I'm stuck. I just don't know what else to do. I'm tired, I'm angry, So I figured I'd write this to vent. If you made it this far, thanks for reading it all. There's still so many different instances that I've left out. I'm just so exhausted. No one really asked for it, but I'm doing an update because I got a lot of good advice. Since my last post, I reached out to my neighbor's family and let them know that I fear for my life. I told them that there is a way they can get him institutionalized through the courthouse if he was refusing to seek mental health treatment. His family said that they would talk to him, have a discussion with him, etc., and that they were aware of the method to get him committed. This was almost 2 weeks ago at this point. Well, that pretty much backfired. Last night, at approximately 10:30 p.m., he was yelling at my camera. He was saying a lot of nonsensical things, but at one point he said that there was nothing wrong with his head or medication, and that I should try a psych ward for myself. Of course, I called the police because I considered this a violation of the no contact order. The police came and I got the worst officer. He told me that it wasn't stalking because he was talking to my camera, not to me. He didn't even go over and talk to my neighbor. He told me that he would send the report to the state attorney's office. I actually do my research in the courthouse, and while I was hesitant to bring this up in the course of my professional responsibilities, I finally bit the bullet and did it. I wanted to do everything the right way, go through the police and send it up the chain, but apparently the police make it impossible to do that. I spoke with the attorney today, and she was very upset about the way everything has been handled. The report had not been sent to their office as of noon today. She called and left a message for the officer for the report and is awaiting to hear back. She told me that she will call me tomorrow with an update. At this point, I will be continuing to advocate for myself directly to the attorney. I will be sending every ounce of evidence, including pictures and videos, to the attorney, with the hopes that we can file multiple charges for stalking against him. Of course, I understand not everything may be prosecutable, but I know I have at least a few things which should stick. I'm really happy to say that I'm satisfied with the way the state attorney's office is handling it at this point. I have gone further with them in one day than I have with the police department in 18 months. That being said, I'm still looking for a new house.